Hello everybody, this is lesson 3 of unit 1. We are going to start today on operations with fractions, operations being addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But today we want to focus just on the multiplying and dividing of fractions, and remember fractions are rational numbers. You might be wondering, why do I need to know how to do this? Well, we're going to take a look at one practical application. I've got a recipe that calls for 3/4 cups of flour. This is actually a cake recipe that I have, but I only want to make half of it, and I'm not sure how much flour to use. So what I'm really thinking is if I'm making a full recipe, then I need 3/4 of a cup. But I'm only going to make half of this, so I really want half of 3/4 of a cup of flour. Now, if you remember in mathematics, if we see the word of, it usually means we're going to multiply. So what we really want to do is take 1/2 and multiply that by 3/4 to get how much flour we're going to need. Since we are multiplying fractions, it'd be a good idea if we understood our rule for multiplying fractions, and I'm just going to jot that down over here. My rule for multiplying fractions. All I really need to do is multiply the numerators multiply the denominators rewrite my fraction so I have a new product for my numerator and a new product for my denominator, and then I want to reduce my fractions, or it might be called simplify. So if I go back now to my problem with the flour, 1/2 multiplied by 3/4 is what I want to calculate, and following my rule, all I need to do is multiply my numerator. So I'm going to write that down, 1 times 3, and then I'm going to multiply the denominators. So I'm going to have 2 multiplied by 4 is my new denominator. Doesn't look like there's anything there that I can cancel out to simplify that early. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that multiplication. 1 times 3 is 3, 2 times 4 is 8, and I get 3/8 of a cup of flour is what I would need. All right, so we have our rule for multiplying fractions. Let's go ahead and do some more examples of these. So I'm going to ask you to turn your page in your notes, and we've got some spaces for doing some practice multiplication. First one we're going to start out with is 3/5 multiplied by 2/7. So I want to multiply those two fractions. My rule for multiplying, multiply my numerator. So I'm going to have 3 times 2 over, multiply my denominators, 5 times 7. Nothing that I can reduce or cancel out there, so I'm going to go ahead and finish that multiplication and get 6 when I multiply 3 times 2 over 35 when I multiply 5 by 7. So there's my fraction on that. Shouldn't be anything to simplify because I looked already and nothing was canceling out. Let's take a look at another example. Supposing I have a fraction, say 3/8, and I'm being asked to multiply that by a whole number, the number 5. I still want to apply my rule of multiplying numerators and multiplying denominators, but with that 5, I don't have a denominator. What I can do then is rewrite my 5 so that it's an equivalent amount but written as a fraction. And to do that with any whole number, all I need to do is write that whole number over 1, because 5 over 1 is the same thing as 5. Now I can go ahead and think about multiplying numerators. 3 times 5 over 8 times 1. And that's not looking like anything can be simplified or reduced, so I'm going to end up with 15 over 8. And there's my solution for that one. Let's take a look at one more example of multiplication of fractions. This time, I'm going to multiply 3 fractions. 1/2 times 3/4 times, oh, let's say 6/10. Now I'm going to go ahead and write that out, multiplying my numerators. 1 times 3 times 6 all over, multiplying my denominators. 2 times 4 times 10. Now I could go ahead and multiply those straight through, and then I would need to do some reducing. However, I can see I have some of these factors have common factors, so I can reduce it now before I do the multiplication across the numerators and the denominators. Here's what I mean. I see that I have a 6 in the numerator, and in the denominator I have 2. Now 2 goes into both of these, the 2 and the 6. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reduce those now before I multiply everything out. 2 goes into 2, becomes 1, and 2 goes into 6 3 times. So now what I have is a multiplication of my 1 times 3 times now a 3, and in the denominator I have, instead of 2, that was reduced to 1, and I'm multiplying that by the 4 and the 10. Don't see anything else that I can reduce or cancel out, so I'm going to go ahead now and multiply that out, and I'm going to get 1 times 3 times 3, which is 9, over 1 times 4 times 10, which is 40. And because I've already done the reducing, there should be no common factor, and 9 over 40 is the reduced or lowest term of that fraction. All right, enough for the multiplication. We're going to go ahead now and look at what happens when we are dividing fractions. So we're looking at division of fractions. Some of you might remember the rules for this one. It's very similar. All we need to do is take our fraction and our divisor, and we do something called multiply by a reciprocal. So I'm going to write that down for now up here. We're going to change our our division problem into multiplication, but we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. And if you don't remember what a reciprocal fraction is, it's just the fraction that we start out with, only we switch the numerator and the denominator. So let's first take a look at an example. Supposing I wanted to take, this is my example number 1, I want to take the fraction 3/8 and I want to do division or divide it by, let's say 9/4. What I want to do instead of division is change the division to multiplication. So this division sign is going to change to multiplication. And instead of dividing by 9/4, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of 9/4. So I'm going to take that 9/4 and I'm going to swap the numerator and the denominator, and my new fraction is going to be 4 over 9. The 3/8 remains the same. Some of you might remember using this phrase keep, because we keep that first fraction the same. Keep change division to multiplication, and flip to get the reciprocal of the 9/4. So if you remember keep change flip when dividing fractions, you should go ahead and set that up now as a multiplication problem, which I can go ahead and solve just like we've done before. So I'm going to take my 3, multiply it by 4, put that over 8, multiplied by the 9. Now you could go ahead and multiply that out straight through. If you did, you would get 12 over 72, but you would need to reduce that. You could use the same process we did in the earlier lesson where we did the tree factorization. Write each of the 12 and 72 as a product of primes and reduce it that way. Or think of the greatest common factor and divide each of those by the greatest common factor, which in this case is 12. If you do that, you get 1 over 6. Now I want to back this up a little bit and show you what would happen if I went back to my 3 multiplied by 4 over 8 multiplied by 9, and if I did some reducing right away from here. I can see, let's see, 3 and 9 have a common factor of 3, so I can divide the 3 by 3 and get 1, divide the 9 by 3 and get 3. The 4 and the 8 also have a common factor of 4. If I divide 4 by 4, I get 1. 4 into 8 goes twice. So now what I would have is a numerator of 1 times 1 over 2 times 3, which gives me that same 1 over 6 reduced fraction. So either way on that one, you should get your answer 1 over 6. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example. And this other example, really I'm relating back to our word problem where I had that recipe with the 3/4 cups of flour. So I'm going to write that down here again. This, by the way, is example number 2. 3/4 cups of flour. But I wanted to divide that recipe in half. I only wanted to make half of it. So what I'm really doing is taking my 3/4 of a cup and I'm dividing it in half, or in other words, dividing it by 2. If I follow my rule, I'm going to do a keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep the 3/4 and I'm going to change my division to multiplication. So here I'm keeping my 3/4. Change that division to multiplication. I think I just said it backwards a moment ago. I want to change my division sign to multiplication. My 2 is not currently written as a fraction, but remember I can always write it as a fraction by putting it over 1. And now I want to multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm multiplying by 1 over 2 instead of 2 over 1. Now notice this gives you the same exact procedure we were doing earlier when we said 3/4 and we wanted 1/2 of that, and we said 1/2 of means 1/2 times. So we get the same thing here. We are going to end up with 3 times 1 over 4 times 2, which gives us that 3/8 of a cup of flour, which is what we would need. All right, that is going to finish us up for today on multiplying and dividing fractions. The next lesson is a little more complicated, and it will focus on adding and subtracting fractions. All right, have a great day, everybody.